Hello. This is my second attempt at doing the live show. Had a problem with the sound. I forgot to plug the microphone in. So welcome once again to another trip through the history of American comics. And today I decided to look through a few of the drags in my collection, including some early material from Image Comics. Image Comics was founded in 1992 by a group of breakaway artists from Marvel Comics, which included Rob Liefeld, Todd McFarlane, Eric Larson, and Jim Lee. And arguably, Jim Lee was the greatest creator in the bunch because he managed to bring to life an entire publisher with a complete universe and several titles being published at the same time, and eventually sold his company to DC Comics, and they are now on the 25th anniversary of the line. They launched a new series called the WildStorm, which is attempting to revive those characters, bring them new life. It's a whole new continuity, and it's all pretty pared down to a single storyline. Maybe it will evolve into a brand new universe. So Rez from Rez Reads mentioned that she was enjoying the new series, but she didn't appear to be as familiar with the majority of the concepts that were presented there. So I thought it would be a good idea to get some of my old magazines from the cupboard and see what I can do to explain what the WildStorm universe was all about. Because although it was started at Image Comics and it was an artist-driven title, eventually it evolved into something that was much greater and had several titles that had incredible quality. Now, in the early years, that was not the issue, but still, to me, it was very exciting when I finally got Wildcats #1. This is the Brazilian edition of the comic, which was published by Globo. The regular Marvel and DC comics were published by Abril, and they decided to go back into superheroes with these and launch a whole new line. They started with 4 magazines, 2 from WildStorm, Wildcats and Gen13, and 2 from Top Cow, which were Cyberforce and Codename Strikeforce. Since I preferred Jim Lee's art to Mark Silvestri's on the X-Men, I thought that Lee's material had a better potential to give rise to good stories, and indeed that's what happened. But in this first 4 issues, they were very. They had a lot of concepts that I found interesting, although they were not very well fleshed out here. Lee got one of his friends, Brandon, tried to write these stories. It's clear that there are several mistakes here in the way the stories are set up, and the dialogue's kind of cringy in a few places. But I found it interesting. We had a typical alien invasion plot, but the characters sounded intriguing enough. Jim Lee had a habit of doing spectacular art first and worrying about the story later. But they were always spectacular. This is part from image #1. So here, pretty much all the heroes are here. These are Grifter, and back then we have Voodoo and Maul. We're only missing Warblade, which also appears here. But this is the moment where they meet the other member of the team, Zealot. Here it is. double-page spread by Jim Lee, which was something that he very much liked to do with the characters posing, and instead of having actual movement. It was a problem with most of the artists at the time. It's like they were stopped in the middle of the action. Not very fluid, not as fluid as we were used to from the 80s in Marvel with artists like John Burnham or Frank Miller. And what we had here was a confrontation between two forces, the Cherubim and the Daemonites. The Cherubim was sympathetic to humans, and they were what became the team Wildcats. Now, the name, this was not supposed to be the team's name. The idea was that CATS means covert action teams, and the fact that they were wild means that they were not employed by an official government. But Lee only paid lip service to the concept, which is something that Warren Ellis is not doing. He's doing the exact opposite in the new WildStorm series. Now we have another shot of the team. The man in front of the suit is Jacob Marlowe, Lord Imp of the Cherubim, and at the time he was amnesiac. He did not remember everything about his past, but he knew he was a Cherubim. And the idea here is that he forms the team with the help of an entity called Void to help him fight the Daemonites. This is the leader of the Daemonites over here, Elspont. The Daemonites here, they need to possess humans in order to exist in Earth's atmosphere. Otherwise, they become helpless, paralyzed. And very funny in this issue, one of the Daemonites has taken over the body of Vice President Dan Quayle. There's also the appearance of several other concepts that became important in the WildStorm universe, including the government organization, international operations, and one of their few leaders, John Lynch. Over here. Lynch would become very important, more important in the Gen13 title, and that international operations existed everywhere, both here in Wildcats, also in a spin-off called Team 7, which dealt with the origin of superpowers in the WildStorm universe, and later, of course, in Gen13, as Lynch's replacement, Ivana Bayo, will try to control the team. Now, since this was one of the first Image comics, there was a part in issue 1 that talked about events that happened in Cyberforce #1. Jim Lee and Mark Silvestri were sharing a office space at the time, Homage Studios. That's why Scott Williams is inking both series at the beginning. But later Silvestri would leave to form his own Top Cow studio. But since this was the beginning of Image Comics, they made sure that all of their characters had plenty of exposition in all of their titles. For example, Savage Dragon gets mentioned in Spawn #1. And here in Wildcats #3, the Wildcats fight Rob Liefeld's Youngblood, who are government operators. They're more visible. They have official sanction to operate, unlike international operations. A funny thing here is with so many government outfits supposedly in the same universe, they would be bound to trip on each other. But eventually, all of the Image partners would stay in their own respective universes and not interact much with each other. Now here, the Wildcats have a chance to find those that would become their most famous enemies. Not only here, Elspont. This is a Coda warrior. Zealot, who I showed you earlier, is a sort of ninja. She founded the Coda Sisterhood, and they're a sort of fighting nuns from the planet Kara, where the Carabins come from. The other soldier here is Spike. It would become a very hard to kill enemy of the Wildcats, and especially would have a feud with Warblade over here. The situation in this first 4-issue arc would be fixed right here. It's also revealed throughout this arc that Spartan is a robot, and that he can transfer his personality from body to body, which is actually very convenient. Most of the early stories in the Wildcats magazine see Spartan get broken apart. And since the X-Men and since the Wildcats are basically the X-Men, this is sort of a running joke that nobody at the time respected Cyclops. Here, since he's the team leader here, the field leader, that is. Now, this first arc was used by Jim Lee to sell the studio Nelvana into creating their own animated series. There was a Wildcats animated series, and but it was pretty poor. It was much more childish than these comics, and at the time this stuff was not very fleshed out, but it had some interesting details that could be further fleshed out, and eventually they would become very interesting parts of the WildStorm universe. None of those are in the cartoon. The cartoon is terrible, probably one of the worst cartoons of the 1990s, and it was just generic superhero action against an alien invasion. The funny thing is there were also other similar cartoons at the time that were based on independent comics properties. Not only Wildcats at Image, but there was also a Savage Dragon cartoon. And from Malibu's Ultraverse, there was an Ultra Force cartoon. And from Dark Horse, there was, of course, The Mask. Now, after a while, Wildcats went into a hiatus, and Jim Lee took the time to develop other concepts, including Stormwatch, whose early issues are not very good. It was another officially sanctioned government team. Actually, they were working for the United Nations. They had their own satellite from going on around Earth's orbit, and where they were always, from which they would go on their missions. There were several Stormwatch teams, but it would take a few years until Stormwatch became actually interesting. And one of the things it developed was Gen13. I was not very interested in Gen13. I did not want to read a take on the New Mutants, but I bought this #2 because this is where Rainmaker joins the team. All the characters around here are still basically discovering their powers. This is Fairchild. She was simultaneously the beefcake and the cheesecake in the Gen13 series, with very long legs. Burnout, Grunge, Rainmaker, Fairchild, and what was the other one? Freefall. These were Gen13, but I really was not that much interested in them. And every time they reinvent the WildStorm universe, these characters are now left out. I suppose that with the right writer, they could do something, but I just was never very interested. The WildStorm universe has so many super teams running around that the having a title focused on people that want to be normal is almost pedestrian. There were also a few other spin-offs. At the time, they launched Deathblow. A friend of mine, I think, has a couple of issues. Backlash, I've never read. There were attempts at doing some spin-offs of the Wildcats. But when the main title finally came back in 1993, it was to have a crossover with Mark Silvestri's Cyberforce. And here it is, a Ripclaw, and who it was established, new Warblade from a few years earlier, as was typical in these magazines. They would have to fight superheroes always fought, and basically when we have mutant cyborgs with large guns, they have to fight. This is the setup for the conflict, which goes on then in Cyberforce. And here they are. These are Cyberforce. If you have a hard time telling the team members apart, well, let's just say the uniforms are not very interesting. There's shiny effects everywhere, which was typical of Joe Chiato's colors. And Cyberforce, all of them have mutant parts. I'm actually quite glad that Top Cow eventually moved on to other things. Even Witchblade is better than Cyberforce, which is very generic, another X-Men clone. And after this, the crossover concludes in Cyberforce. After this, I bought a few other issues of Wildcats, but the Brazilian publisher stopped doing superhero stories at the time. And it was interesting because I think Jim Lee understood that he was not a very good writer. Brandon Chai was not the best he had at his disposal. And even though Chris Claremont did not like the way that Lee created the stories without his input at Marvel, he basically went back to working with Lear, no problem. He wrote the dialogues. And after that, James Robinson also took the time to develop the characters a bit further. But it was only after with Alan Moore that the Wildcats actually became a lot more interesting, since they would be going into outer space and finally settle the issue between the Caribbean and the Daemonites. Let's see, is this the one with the 4-page spread? No, this is not the one with the 4-page spread, but there was a Wildcats issue where Lee basically pulled a Steranko and managed to draw a 4-page spread that you had to open the entire magazine. I don't think I have that issue. No. By this time, though, Zealot started to wear pants, which would probably be a lot more comfortable for her. We have here also a few other heroes were introduced around this time. This is Zealot's sister, Savant, and a Superman clone, Mr. Majestic. He was not the only Superman clone in the WildStorm universe. There was also Union. Union actually got a mini-series before the Wildcats were relaunched, but Majestic became a much more interesting, well thought out, well fleshed out character. I don't remember which planet Union comes from. It was more violent, and Majestic, being a Caribbean, eventually became the Superman type that he was destined to become. There was during the 90s. There was another Superman. There were Superman clones everywhere in Image Comics. The most famous was probably Supreme by Rob Liefeld, which actually had a very interesting run by Alan Moore. The comic was canceled after this one. This one was part of a swap month where the Image artists all swapped their issues, and Eric Larson from Savage Dragon draws this issue. Here he is copying Jack Kirby. There was from the scene is from the New Gods. This type of vehicle, New Gods. Eric Larson actually was very good at channeling Kirby. There are a lot of guest stars from the Larson's Savage Dragon comic. Freak Force over here. Mighty Man, which is a take on DC's Captain Marvel from Shazam. Super Patriot. And Savage Dragon actually appears here at the end. Tell everybody to knock it off. This issue is actually kind of silly. Around this time, so there was Gen13, there was Stormwatch, there were the solo titles Backlash and Deathblow, and then WildC.A.T.s Portaccio finally had the time to finish what was promised in 1992. Only in 1994 there was Wetworks with another group of cyborgs. They had this golden armor thingy that they called the symbiote, and that story incorporated vampires and werewolves in the WildStorm universe. I never read Wetworks, and I'm really not that interested. I find Portaccio's artwork confusing, and nowadays werewolves and vampires are pretty beat out. What eventually happened around late 1995 was that WildStorm launched a crossover that went around all the titles. It was called Fire from Heaven. This is a Brazilian edition. After Globo stopped publishing, it went to Abril. This is issue number 1. They published the entire crossover as a 2-issue miniseries, 2 comics with 130 pages each. So it was a good read if you were looking to have something to keep you occupied for a couple of hours, but still, the regular artwork that you found in WildStorm with all this computer coloring did not translate well to this smaller size. This is terrible. The paper is not good for this type of coloring. Here's Union, the other Superman clone. Now everybody was in here, and here is fighting Majestic. Here is that everybody fought everyone. There was machinations by Damonites. Hellspawn was done by this time. I don't remember what his name was. Let's see now. Lord Defile, I think that was his name. That tried to get Stormwatch and the Wildcats to fight each other. And the Wetworks and Gen13 were also involved. He introduced a few elements from in Teen 7's past. They basically unwittingly set up the events that happened here in Fire from Heaven. As a consequence, this is sort of the end of a cycle in the WildStorm universe. It coincided with the comics market bottoming out and a lot of publishers going out of business. WildStorm started to pay more attention to editorial output. I think Scott Dunbier was already the editor by this time. And as a consequence, the Wildcats would now be written by Al Moore, and they went off into space at the end of this story, leaving Grifter behind. Majestic went with the team. They found out about where they came from. Deathblow would sacrifice himself. He would die in his own title later. And Backlash also had his own title. And after this, Warren Ellis started writing Stormwatch, which was a much more interesting period in the publisher's history. This happened before DC bought the company from Jim Lee, and while this was already a couple of years later, I thought it was a good way to close out the cycle. JLA Wildcats, an intercompany crossover at the time, which sees both teams going across universes. This was from the Grant Morrison period, so as you can see, this was Electric Superman. And the Wildcats team had already come back from outer space by this time. That's why Grifter is working with them at this stage. No Jacob Marlowe here though. So since this closes out a cycle, for next week I'll probably do part 2, and I'm going to be showing you the Stormwatch phase that predated the purchase by DC and the launch of the Authority, which was at the time arguably WildStorm's best comic. So I hope you enjoyed the strip through the early years of the WildStorm universe. This was 25 years ago. To me, it still seems a bit like yesterday, since this Wildcats #1 was the first time I bought something regular that was not Marvel and DC. And I'm not sure you can buy this nowadays. The magazines are probably cheap in the back issue bins. They used to be the ones that Wizard said that were going to be worth $100 in the future, but right now they're probably very cheap to get. They probably won't be collected because there's all of the appearances by other Image characters there, and getting the rights to Youngblood and Cyberforce just with these stories. There's no point to it. So in that regard, thank you for taking this trip with me through the early years of WildStorm, and we're going to, as I said, we're going to continue next week. So